Good morning, good morning. How's everyone's morning going? I have been painting all morning. Other than classes, I've kind of been having a creative block, but something just kind of broke last night, and now I can't stop painting. It's kind of how it works sometimes with me. Hi, how are you? Where's everyone joining from today? And how's your weather? It is muggy and hot here. So today we're going to be talking about trees, and you might want to just grab a sketchbook for this one. My plan is that we're going to play with a few different techniques. So I did some little studies here. Sorry, I keep knocking everything over. We're going to, I don't know if you have masking fluid. I am going to demonstrate with some masking fluid on one of these so that you can see. So we're going to be doing some deciduous trees, and then we're going to be doing some evergreen trees. And yeah, I've been gardening all morning in Philly. Nice. That sounds really nice, especially if it's nice and cool in the morning. Okay, so yeah, we're going to be doing two different deciduous trees, or groups of them, one with masking fluids and then one without. And then we're going to do some evergreen trees with watercolor. And one is going to be kind of what I typically do, which is more similar to a Colorado blue spruce, where the branches go ahead and go straight out. And then we'll do a different one where the branches kind of go up and swoop up. And then we're going to do one actual little painting that's going to kind of use some of the techniques we've used before, where we'll make a sky. And then we're going to do some really simple forest looks on the bottom of it so that you can kind of get the effect of a really simple tree line. Okay. So, it is after 11, so let me introduce myself. My name is Lacey Walker. I'm the artist behind Rebel Unicorn Crafts, and I teach live classes every Saturday here at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. Now, this class will be recorded as long as TikTok records it, and then I do upload them later in case you can't make the whole thing or you just want to rewatch it and try again. So, we're going to be getting started. Today I'm going to be working with, I've got one piece of tape down paper. I've got a little sketchbook with this segmented into 4 different ones. You don't have to do everything I'm doing today, but feel free to do as many as you want. I will be using a dry pan palette. I have my water off to the side, and I'm going to go ahead and actually spritz these so that they're ready to go when we do start painting. And then I'm going to be using some round brushes. I've got a smaller one, a size 6, and then this size 10 one here. Okay. Let's actually start, because technically you should let masking fluid sit for a really long time, preferably overnight, but I'm not going to be putting too much on, so I'm going to go ahead and actually put that on, because then we can work on these 3 over here while I'm waiting for this masking fluid to dry. All right, so let me show you a painting I did last night. So what we're going to do with this masking fluid one here is we're basically going to block off where all of the trunks are going to be so that it will leave some white space for us to actually play with those trunks, and we don't have to be super careful with the little clusters of leaves. You may have seen my video the other day about this ruling pen. This is my new favorite way to put masking fluid on. So this is the Grumbacher Misket or the Frisket one. And I usually have to just mix this up so that there isn't a color additive to this that doesn't stain the paper, but it kind of lets you know where you put things down. So I'm going to go ahead and just try to define a few tree trunks here. Now this ruling pen is great because it actually helps just with really precise placement, and then it just dries on here and you can peel it off and it's ready to go again. Okay, so for this I'm just going to define some kind of thin trunks. Maybe we'll actually have one that kind of goes up. Maybe there's a hint there. Maybe there's another one over here. Maybe there are some hints back here of some other trunks. And let's leave it like that. Let's leave those 5 trunks there. So you don't have to do this part. I just want to show you the difference between doing some trees in similar ways, but one with masking fluid and one without. So, hi. So I'm using, this is a masking fluid, and I want to show you the difference in painting trees with some masking and then without. Now, typically when we put masking fluid on, you want to let this dry maybe even overnight. I'm going to risk it. This isn't too much masking fluid. And I'm going to put this down and we're going to work on some other stuff before I circle back to this one so that you can see the 2 different methods. If you do have masking fluid, go ahead and define a few different little trunks. You can even just do a couple little strokes of it just to kind of give yourself some trunks there. So I use this ruling pen for a few reasons. One, it does help with super precise placement. I can really control where it goes. And then it does not ruin my brush. See, you can already see it starting to dry, and all I have to do is just peel it off of there. And then it's completely ready to go. So I've ruined way too many brushes with masking fluid. And I used to use, in between using brushes and this, I used little silicone brushes, and I liked them, but half the time I was accidentally rubbing off the dry areas of the masking fluid with it, and I don't get that with this. And this is just super easy to clean up. It's basically clean now. I have a little video demonstrating that too if you want to watch that at some point. Alright, so before I actually start painting on these, I want to talk about a couple things. And I'm going to use this little corner down here. So, when we're looking for trees, one of the things we want to do is kind of define light sources and figure out where there's going to be light and where there's going to be shadows. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to determine a side that the light is going to be hitting from. And on that side, you're going to use some warmer colors. And then if the sun were shining from this direction, over here, then the shadow is going to fall over here, and you want to do that with some blues and some cool colors like violets. Oops, that's probably a little bit too much. But by kind of creating an underwash where you start with this nice bright color, it's going to make it look like when you put all the branches over it, the warmth, because sunlight is typically a very warm color, and if the sun is hitting it from this side, if we kind of do a wash where we really highlight all those really warm areas, it's going to allow us to be pretty loose and free with this, but it's going to still kind of give the illusion of depth and light. Yeah, you could absolutely use a toothpick for starting out with masking fluid. I bought this little ruling pen for I think about $5 though. So if that's in your price range, then this is a great tool. But you can use whatever you have. You could use Q-tips, you could use brushes. Now you can technically kind of try to prevent your brushes from having negative effects of the masking fluid and completely ruining them if you dip them in like a dish soap first. I never thought it worked super great, but it does help. All right, so again, we want to have the warm area where the light is hitting it, and then we want the cool area to be the places that are in shadow. So you can kind of see that here, where there's a little bit of warmth coming through the top parts, and then everything that's in shadow is going to be that kind of darker, more cool area. So we're going to start with the deciduous trees, and we're not going to be using the one with masking fluid yet because I need this to dry a little bit more over here. But what I want to do to start, move some of this stuff out of the way. It's always an interesting balance of trying to put this where you can see it as well as get everything in frame. All right, so I want to start with kind of a nice warm yellowy golden type color, and I'm just doing this with my dry palette. I'm going to put a little tiny bit of water here just with my brush. I'm going to grab some of this yellow ochre color. I'm also going to grab a little bit of this orange vermilion color just to give it kind of a nice warm glow to it. And then I'm going to just double check. I think I want this to be a little bit more yellow. So I don't think I was the one who did orbs with violet rather than black. I think that might have possibly been a different painter. But yes, yeah, you can definitely use using blues and oranges is a great way to create shadow rather than using straight black. All right, I think I want a little bit more brightness, so I'm going to actually grab, this is my permanent yellow deep. Ooh, that's probably too much. There we go. That's the color I want to use for my highlights in that warm area. A little bit more water in there just to water that down a little bit. And then the first thing I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to start to make some kind of little bulbous areas. You can be real loose with this. Leave some white space. And in general, the general shape, normally I don't do this. I kind of do whatever I'm going to do, but the general shape of the tree, we kind of want to put it into little segments, kind of like this. Maybe there's a little one here and a little one here, so that we have kind of a general tree shape here. And so I'm going to kind of fill those in, keeping in mind that the light is coming from this direction. So I want to really make sure that yellow color is a little bit heavier towards this side, and I don't need to worry about it so much in those. But in each one of these little bulbous areas, I want to kind of fill this out with some of this bright golden color, leaning towards the side that the light is going to be hitting it from. You can choose whichever direction you want your light to hit from. You just want to make the adjustments that would be necessary. Okay. So we've just got some little scribbles, and again, I'm just using a round brush to do some little scribbles there to kind of define some of those bright light areas. And now we want to actually go in with some green, because this tree is, I mean, you can definitely do this with a color changing tree for the fall time, but I want mine to be more of a summertime type tree, just with a nice glow on it. So I'm going to go ahead and in a different little well here, I'm just going to grab some some sort of green. I've got an olive and a sap green here I'm going to mix in, and it had a little bit of that yellow in my brush. Let's just double check that color here on the page. I think that's a nice color. We're going to be adding in quite a few different colors, but this is the color I'm going to start with. Now I'm going to go over those same areas, and things are still a little bit wet, and I'm going to kind of go up to the edge, but not quite. And I'm going to leave white space, because it's going to create different interesting areas within this tree so that it looks like the light is hitting it in different ways. And again, so each one of these little bulbous areas that I defined, I'm kind of trying to work within the parameters of those little areas. Again, make sure that you leave some of that yellow showing on the edges that would be most hit by that sunlight. And, go out of the lines a little bit to kind of hint to maybe a few little leaves just kind of poking out. So the next thing I want to do is while this starts to dry, you really need to get to know how this is drying. And we want to start to define some of those real shadowy areas. So let's go ahead and grab in a different well. Let's actually use some of this violet with that yellow, because that's going to mute that color. And then let's grab a little bit of this blue too. Any blue will do. I think this one is cobalt or ultramarine, and this is actually a pretty decently dark color here. You can see it there. And I just want to tap this on these areas that are on the opposite side of the yellow in the bulbous areas. And ideally this is still going to be a little bit wet in those areas. And if you're like me where this is maybe a little bit too dry, it's a little too dry in a couple areas, let's actually go back in, wash our brush, and grab some more of this green color. And kind of encourage those to flow a little bit, because we want these to be nice and flowy and kind of let the water do its thing and go into the nooks and crannies of the paper and the other dry or darker area or wet areas, because that's going to help give us the effect. So again, I just kind of re-wet those areas. I'm going back in with this darker color again. And I'm just touching right along kind of the bottoms of those bulbous areas where those shadows would really fall. And if you do this when it's nice and wet, it'll kind of flow and just kind of do its thing, which is exactly what we want to happen. And just work back and forth between that light green and that dark color. And then we want to let this sit for a second so that we can actually go back in and add some more details. But once you have it defined nicely, where you're getting quite a bit of that yellow on the top side, some of the green in the middle, and then those darker shadows on the opposite sides of the little bulbous balls, then you can actually just kind of let it sit. But I need to do this a little bit more on the sides of some of these here. Just a little bit more. Okay, now I do want to let this dry because you get different effects when you're working on dry paper versus wet paper, and we'll get a little bit extra texture, which will be really nice if we let this just settle for a second. So while we're letting this one settle here, let's go ahead and go over to our Evergreen Tree. And we need to mix up, if you ran out, like I don't have very much of this, but I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to highlight basically the whole shape of it with a nice kind of golden type color. Just to give it a nice subtle outline. That's a nice color there. So mine is basically yellow ochre, And then there is still a little bit of that vermilion hue in it, plus some yellow permanent deep. And we're going to do a couple different evergreen trees here. These are the ones that are going to be pretty conical, and the branches are going to kind of come straight out. Ooh, is there a filter or something on this? Let me see if I can turn anything off. Yeah, there's some sort of a weird filter here. None. I can't turn it off. So if that's doing something weird, sorry about that. Alright, so I have my brush loaded with that golden color, and they were pretty conical looking. But we just start by touching just at the top, and then we're going to kind of move our brush horizontally in little scribble ways. Little scribbles, just down, and just get a little bit wider with each kind of little bit of a row you're making. And remember that nature is really natural, and there are a ton of variations in nature, so it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. Your tree will probably look different than my tree, and that's totally good. It looks normal? Okay, good. I thought I saw it being kind of scrunched in. I'm going to do a second one of those with that same golden color. Maybe I'll vary the height. Remember to leave some white space. That's one of the hardest things to learn in watercolor, is leaning into the white space and the kind of unfinished space is sometimes what actually makes a piece look more finished, rather than trying to kind of overwork it and fill in every gap. So I've got two trees here. These are the more outward facing, straight out facing branches. And again, we want to mix up a green. Now we want to do this in a couple different stages because, again, even though evergreen trees are typically a lot darker, there is some variation in what the colors are going to look like based on where the sun is going to be. Now, for this one, the sun, let's kind of treat it like the sun is kind of shining from straight up, I think, how I want to do this one. If I can get this going right, maybe we'll do one where the sun is shining straight down on this one, and then we'll do another one where it's shining in a similar direction to over in this one here. And I do have a YouTube channel. It's Rebel Unicorn Crafts, and you can find all the live replays there, plus some additional stuff. So I'm going to mix up, I'm going to grab some water with my brush and just put it in this little well here. And again, I'm going to start with this olive green. But I'm going to put a little viridian hue in there because these evergreen trees are a little bit deeper green. I'm going to start with this color here. I can always add in other colors as I go. So for this one where the light is coming from straight down, we kind of want to concentrate. We want to leave a little bit of that yellow on both of the sides. And where the boughs are going to catch the light, and then there will be bits of shadow all the way down. It'll be similar on this one, but will be heavier to one side. So I've got my green color loaded in here, and I think I actually want to make this a little bit lighter, so I'm going to grab one more brush full of water. And depending on how wet your yellow still is, you're going to have some slightly different effects. In this one, we're actually going to work with multiple colors kind of as we go down. And I like to actually grab more of the color where I actually put it down first. So see, rather than loading my brush from there, I'm just actually loading it from within the painting. And I'm just kind of, it's more of that scribble, but I'm kind of moving it down just a little bit. Grab some more of that here. Okay, So now I have kind of filled this in with a base green. And I want to start to define some of those shadows a little bit, and I can do that with some of this Viridian green and kind of try to get that just on the bottoms of some of these. That might be too much. I'm going to scribble my brush off just a little bit here to kind of reduce the amount. And I'm just going to choose a few different areas on the bottoms of some of these ones that have kind of been defined to place some of this darker color here. And I'm working wet on wet here, so this is going onto a wet paper. And we want to add in some more variation of color. So I want to actually take some of, let's see if I can move this into frame. I'm going to take some of this base color we use, and then I'm going to grab some of this sap green to make a fairly concentrated green color that's a little bit more muted, and I'm going to just drop this into a couple little areas here. Okay, now I have washed my brush, I've dried it off, and I'm going to suck up just a little bit of some of those colors so that they're not going to bleed together too much. And I'm going to go back in with some of that blue color. This is, I'm actually going to use that dark blue color we used for the Deciduous Tree. I'm just going to put a little bit of that in the tip here. And again, I'm just going to kind of, I want to wait for this to dry probably a little bit more. But I'm going to come into some of these areas and further define where some of these shadows would be. Okay, it's still too wet. I need to just wait for a second. Sometimes that's the hardest part, is just waiting. We can actually get started on this other one while we wait for this one to dry a little bit. And for this one, we're going to do kind of the same thing we did on the first one, except for we're going to cover all of the yellow that's on this side. We're only going to be leaving some of the yellow kind of throughout, more on this side, this whole side here, and then a few little peekaboo areas on this side, and then cover it all up over here. Starting with that initial green. Mine is pretty much dry here. Trying to make sure I cover as much as I can on this side. So I'm actually going to kind of start by defining some of these areas just to kind of, so that I remember that I want all of those covered. And then as I move over this way, I'm going to be a little bit lighter in my touch. So that there's more of that yellow kind of showing through. And then we're going to start to define, I'm going to use that Viridian color that's right here, and I'm going to put this heavily, or more heavily, on this side over here. I'm just touching this in a couple areas and just kind of letting it bleed in and bleed through. But we're really just doing this on this right side because the light's going to be hitting over here. We might put it in a couple little areas, but we're mainly putting it over on the side that's in shadow. Okay, I'm going to come in with a little bit of this dark blue color, just put that in the tip of my brush. My brush is just barely damp when I grab that. I need a little bit more though. And again, I'm just really concentrating this on the side that is in shadow here. Now, one thing I will say about trees is I feel like I'm having a little bit of an off day with trees, and I kind of feel like trees are one of those things you paint and they either are like perfect that day, or they're a little bit of a struggle bus thing. And so if you're having one of those days, it's all right. It might just be the day where you're having a few struggles, and that's fine. All right, I'm going to pause on this one here, and then we're going to go back to this one. This one should be, it's not 100% dry, but it's pretty much dry and maybe just a tiny bit damp, which should work pretty good for creating some extra texture. And I'm going to go in with that sap green that we have over here. Maybe grab even a little bit more. And then we're going to, again, we're taking advantage of what the layer before has, and we're only going to be putting this in some areas and leaving some of that layer behind it visible so that we get some depth. And again, we're going to grab some of this darker blue. I think I need to just put some in my brush there from that. And then on the bottoms of where we just put some of those new shapes, we're going to tap in some of that darker color to create shadows on the bottom of each of these boughs. Or, well, they don't have to be on every single one, but on quite a few of them. You love the instant when your brain takes it from paint on paper into a 3D tree. Yeah, isn't that fun? And let's just define, again, some of these boughs at the bottom. We're just trying to create some dimensionality, and I feel like we're finally starting to get kind of there a little bit. This might take one more layer. I'm going to, again, let this dry a little bit more. The other fun thing we can do, and since we're kind of just playing today, is wash your brush off, and while it's at this stage where it's still damp, you can take the little bit of water that's in kind of a damp brush and you can actually touch it in some of these damp areas, and it will push some of that pigment away from it, and it will actually create some additional highlights and some more texture. That it'll create kind of a blooming effect, which in some ways will help mimic the shape of those boughs. Let's see if you can see that a little bit. I just really love doing that because I think it's just such a fun, interesting texture. And I do wish I had covered up a little bit more of that yellow over there, but, you know, it's all right. We're practicing and learning right now. Okay, so let's give this tree a similar treatment to that one, except for we're going to be really mindful of where we place the shadows, and they're mainly going to be on this side. Oh, hello, I'm so glad. Okay, I think I need a little bit more of that sap green because this is the color I think I want to put throughout this. I really love this sap green color. Again, we're going to create little boughs and touch, and we're going to make sure we maintain keeping some of that white space. Well, it's not white space. Right now it's going to be kind of green and yellow space, but we're basically just trying not to completely cover the layer before. This is pretty much dry that I'm placing this on, because if we do this, where we build these different layers on top, it's going to really give us the effect of more texture, and, you know, trees have a lot of different layers to them, so it'll kind of give us a better effect for that. Again, I'm going to grab some more of this blue. This is phthalo blue. I'm going to grab some of that color. I think that'll look really pretty in here. And I'm going to concentrate this again on the right side here, and maybe into a few of those little boughs over there. But we really want this side to be much darker than the other side. There will be some shadows over on this side too, so you might want to drop in a couple, but you know, you want to be a little bit more sparing with those ones. I'm going to grab a little bit more. maybe even go straight into that phthalo blue to really get some real blue pigment. And really concentrate that on kind of the bottom part over here and on this side to really show how cool the light is on this side of this tree. You can sneak it in a little bit kind of to the center, but keep it really concentrated. And that's going to kind of give that effect. Again, I'm going to wash my brush off and make it damp. And I'm going to drop in little bits of water to get that blooming effect, but I'm mainly going to do that on this left side and a little bit into the middle. I'm going to not really do that much into the other side. All right. So, for me to do anything else to these two trees or decide, I really need to kind of step away from them and let that dry. So let's actually revisit our deciduous tree up here, and this one is dry enough for me to do another layer. I'm going to wash my brush because I don't remember what colors are in it. And I'm actually going to start by putting a little bit of this yellow back into some of these areas here. Because I'm going to work on each one of these little bulbs here individually. So I'm going to start with this yellow on this bulb. I'm going to grab some of the green that we've mixed up. It's going to be a little different color now, and that's fine because we've put some of those other colors in, and I'm just going to kind of drop that in to a few of these areas. And then I've got the green kind of coming down here, and again I'm going to grab some of this darker blue color. So why would I only do the blooming effect on one area? Because since you can do it however you want to. This is, you can kind of figure out what works for you. But for me, what I find is that the blooming effect, since it pushes a lot of that pigment away to the sides, it ends up kind of creating incidental highlights. So since we decided that our light source was coming from this direction, I don't want there to be highlights really on this side. I just want the highlights to be on this side. But that's just kind of a general choice that I've made within that painting. So if you find that something else works, then you should definitely do that. Okay, I'm trying to get some straight phthalo blue onto here because in a few areas I just really want it to be extra concentrated. Be a little sparing, but kind of think about maybe where there might be some areas that kind of branch off. Okay, so I've got one bulb pretty well defined here. Now I'm going to move on to this bulb. Well, actually I'm going to wait because it's still pretty wet here and I don't want that yellow to grab a bunch of that green. So let's try this bulb here, and I'm going to try not to touch where that green is. I'm going to put that yellow here, grab some of this, and again we're just kind of trying to build layers here. Grab that blue, and we're going to concentrate that on this side where the light would be hitting it. Do I ever work in gouache? I always find this funny. Well, I don't always find it funny because I just realized this a little bit ago. But when I first started painting with watercolor and stuff, I had some gouache and I had a ton of success painting with it. I look back at those paintings and they were really good. But for some reason, after I did the first few of them, I just stopped using it. And I haven't used it for like 4 years now. So I'm a little bit scared to reuse it, I guess. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I think I can avoid this one here. We're just doing the same little treatment to each one of these. Again, we're trying to leave some white space a little bit. We're kind of working from that bright yellow down to a green color, and then we're making shadows at the base of things with our nice blue color. Hello, hello. Just doing this with each one of these, and you'll kind of get a feel of when you start to like some of the colors of things that are happening. Like I really like how this is bleeding up into here. And in general, since the tree is going to be way more in shade on this side, you can actually lean a little heavier into the greens and into the blues so that you have more shadows. If it gets a little bit too dark, just go ahead and grab some water and just kind of help blend these together a little bit. You could even come in straight with some of this like sap green or something. And you can drop that in a couple areas while things are still kind of damp. That one's not damp. What's the darkest value used for green? Do you use complementary color for shades? So in general, what I'm using today is not really complementary colors necessarily. It's more about I'm trying to create warmth on one side and coolness on the other side. So I am using yellow into kind of a blue color on the other side. Now you can definitely drop in things like some violet. Let's actually see what happens if we add in a little bit of this violet here. That might add some extra interest. It absolutely does, actually. Dropping in a little bit of that violet color. Yeah, I actually really like that. So, starting with foliage or branches, I'm going to give kind of two answers to that. I typically start with foliage, but over here I have masked off some of the branches. So on this one, I'm technically starting with the branches, but then I'm painting the foliage first, and then I will do the branches at the very end. All right. So this isn't my favorite tree I've done, but it is kind of a good time. It's sometimes having a little bit of the bleeding into the trunk from these wet areas. It might be a good time to start defining a trunk. I'm actually going to switch over to a slightly smaller brush here. And I'm going to start to mix up kind of a brownish color. So this is, I believe, my burnt sienna, I think. I really need to figure out what these swatches are. And then I find that if you take some of this phthalo blue into this color, it makes a really nice kind of deep brown. Like this, that I really like to use for these trees. Okay, so our trunk, maybe a little bit more of that burnt sienna, went a little too dark. For our trunk, maybe we have one main area that's kind of coming up here. And maybe over here, just kind of try to define, maybe it's got a little imperfection there and comes down. I'm going to kind of predefine that color, then I'm going, or the shape, and then I'm going to wash my brush off, make it damp. And I'm just going to kind of make this whole area damp here. And then right along the sides, I'm going to go ahead and concentrate some more of these colors so they flow a little bit. And maybe go straight in with some of the warmer colors and dot those in a couple areas, because tree trunks, you know, they've got a lot of variation. If you get too much color concentrated in one area like me, go ahead and wash your brush. And again, the light's going to hit it in similar ways. So we want to make sure that we lighten the side that is going to be hit. You could even go ahead and drop in a little bit of that warm color on that side, and then grab some of this blue color and drop this in this other side. This is another one where we can do multiple layers to create the shadows. Do you wash your palette of paints and under running water to refresh them occasionally, or do you just let it fly? I pretty much let it fly. If I need to wash some of these off, I do a couple things. One is if I see there's a bunch of green on this yellow, I will take a damp, clean brush and I can just kind of grab that off, and then it's gone. And then to actually wash these colors off, I will take at the very end of like a painting session, this is the soaked paper towel, and I'll just wipe it off, and then it's clean. Okay. So I want to, while this is dried a little bit more, I'm going to grab a little more of this blue color, and I'm going to further define some of the shadows over here. There would also be a little bit of a shadow on that side. And then I'm going to grab some more of this kind of darker brown color we made. And drop that in. You love using violet in shadow yourself? Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to do that. It does actually add quite a bit if you use the violet colors kind of in shadows. Let's put a little bit here if you want to add some warmth for sure. We're just kind of trying to concentrate a lot of that color on that one side. Then we want to let this dry. I'm going to add some final details on this trunk in a little bit, as well as I'm going to add some little interior branches, but I need to make sure that these are all dry before I go ahead and do that. Uh-oh, I feel a sneeze coming on, so I pre-apologize if that happens. Alright, let's look back at these evergreen trees. I actually like this one. I think I will keep this one here, and I kind of like what's happening here, so I think I'm going to leave these two as they are. They're not my favorites, but we're going to do basically the same thing over here, except for we're going to channel a slightly different green evergreen tree. Some of the ones that the branches kind of sweep up a little bit, so there are a bunch of different ones that I can think of, like more like the white spruce, or the brewer spruce kind of go up in this way, and they've got a little bit more separation between branches, but the branches go like this. So we're going to do basically the same thing we did over on this one. So I need to make sure I mix up enough, a little bit more of this kind of golden color here. And I'm going to define. So rather than kind of going out to the side, we're going to be a little bit freer with our brush stroke, and we're going to really kind of touch it so that it goes upwards and leave more white space. Make sure you let those, and this should be a little bit darker, I think, here, so we can really see it better. Make sure that it really indicates that some of these branches are going upwards. And I think I actually put my branches a little bit too close to each other. So let's do that one again here. Just start at the top. Making sure occasionally to leave more gaps than I did previously. But I'm kind of swooping upward a little bit. Okay. So I like the shape of that one a little better. I'm going to have to lean into the swoops a little bit more on this one when I add in my green color. Let's go ahead and mix up another green. And I'm going to grab some of that sap green in here. And again, I'm going to add in a little bit of that viridian hue just to give this a little bit more of a blue hue. Typically, not always, but a lot of times with evergreen trees, they have a little bit more of a blue undertone. So I'm going to grab some of that color here. And I'm going to, you can see this is going to be different in different areas because you can kind of see where there's some water hanging out. But again, we're just going to kind of try to create and lean into some of that white space. And swoop upwards. You know, it's funny how much different using basically the same technique but a slight variation, like a little bit of a swoop, is really going to change the look of different trees. And before we actually do the, no wait, we got to do the deciduous trees too. But we're going to do, we are going to be, in a minute, going ahead and swoop up, not out, up, up, up. We are going to be doing one kind of complete painting with almost like cedar trees. So if you want to do that one, you do want to maybe tape that one down. You can do it in a sketchbook too, but we're going to be using, I've got a little 4x6 piece. And this one we're going to move a little bit faster on, just because we're basically doing the same thing, but we've swooped up rather than swooped out. Just a little bit of change in brush placement and direction is going to really give a very different feel of the tree in general. Let's put a little more blue in there. And again, if you want to, you can wash your brush, and with the damp part of it, you can go ahead and add in some damp little blooms that will create some interesting texture on some of these. I probably would want to actually fill in a few of those gaps there, not too many. And the looser you are with this, the more, interpretive it will be. So you can kind of choose how loose you want to be with something. You bought watercolor postcards to encourage you to paint little projects. Oh, that's so fun. I love receiving little postcards from friends and things. That's a great incentive. And then it serves like multiple purposes, connection, painting, relaxation. Again, I'm just dropping in a little bit of water here. So these ones, I'm not going to spend as much time on. Feel free to spend as much time on them as you want. But I do want to make sure we get through a bunch of different stuff today. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to paint a fun little sky. I'm going to come back and do the deciduous trees in a minute. But I want to get started on this where we're going to kind of actually compose a whole painting here. And with this one, we're going to be doing cedar trees in the foreground. So, but you want to do a fun sky. I'm going to do a nice blue sky that's going to have some lifted clouds in it. That's just kind of what I'm feeling like doing. So I'm going to go ahead and actually grab, what color do I want to take? I'm going to take this green out and make a nice blue color in here for my sky. So I'm just using the wet, damp parts of my paper towel here and just creating myself a nice clean space. I'm going to we want a decent amount of water for this one because we're actually going to be covering this whole page, so I want to mix up quite a bit of color. So I'm going to put a couple sprays, maybe one more of water. I'm going to wash my brush because I've got all sorts of greens, and I don't want a green sky. We're not going tornado today. And now I'm going to mix up a nice blue color. I'm kind of thinking a little bit of this cerulean blue would be nice. And then I want to deepen it with a little bit of, this is ultramarine. Maybe give it a kind of a unique hue by putting in some of that phthalo blue. Sketch on envelopes. Ooh, that's a cool idea. So that's a nice color. I'm going to be lifting out clouds, so if you want to lift out clouds with me, you might want to grab a dry piece of paper towel or some sort of a sponge. But you don't need very much. And you want a nice rough edge. So kind of scrunch this up and then rip it so that you've got this will be readily available for you to lift these clouds. I think I want it to be a little bit darker, so I'm going to add in a little bit more, well, it was quite a bit more of that ultramarine. And I think this is a nice sky color here. So, for this one here, we're doing just a nice sky with some clouds in it. And if you've never done a sky with me before, you mix up the colors you want in a decent quantity so that you make sure you can cover the whole thing. And then we use a drip line technique for our flat wash. So we want to take a nice big round brush, really fill it up with water, and then we're going to make a horizontal stripe across, and I probably needed more water. There we go. Because what we're looking for is we're holding our paper down at an angle so that we get that drip line forming. You can see it at the bottom of there. And then we just make horizontal stripes and grab that drip line. I let that top one sit a little bit too much, so you're probably going to see a line there. That's all right, though. And we just do this all the way down to the bottom. You want to work kind of quickly so that the pigment doesn't settle in that drip line. And also because we're going to be lifting out clouds, we want to make sure everything is still nice and wet. All the way down to the bottom. Quickly dry your brush off and grab that extra water here. I don't want that to sit, but we want to move kind of fast. So I'm going to take one of the edges that I ripped off, and I'm just going to lift out some nice fluffy clouds. And once it gets saturated, you can just rip off a little bit here. Make your clouds kind of however you want them to be. We want to work pretty fast. If, like me, it's starting to dry, you can actually use a damp brush to kind of encourage few areas to be a little bit more pliable before lifting. Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is my favorite nail polish color. It's Sally Hansen, and I got some of that paper towel in there. I'm going to try to grab that. And I think it's called Royal Hue. There. I like my little clouds. I'm going to keep that. Yes, so it's just a paper towel. And the real trick is, I actually don't like these paper towels I have here, but you want to rip it so that you get the natural edge of it so that it's nice and fluffy. And there. And now we have cool clouds. So the reason why I did this really quick is I want this to be super dry before I actually move on to adding our little cheater trees, which is going to be kind of our final little treat for doing this this class today. And you technically could make this a lot lighter on the bottom, but you know, blue works well with green, so it'll be a nice color. Alright, so that I want to do these deciduous trees with this masking fluid. I'm going to be a little bit more fast and loose with this one because we've already talked about the deciduous trees a little bit, and I want to make sure we get to making our other painting and stuff, but I'm going to go ahead and define, I actually want mine to be a little bit more golden this time, so I'm going to grab a little bit more of this vermilion color for my light, kind of my light source. I'm going to just kind of start touching this in a couple areas. We don't need to have anything be perfect. But this is the one that I masked off. So you can see that I can paint right over where those trunks are going to be. Yeah, I do classes every week. I just so you guys know, I really do appreciate when you help me answer questions and stuff, just in case I've lost track. Thank you very much. Because I want to make sure everybody's questions get answered, but sometimes I'm really getting into what I'm doing. So on this one, I'm trying to be a little bit looser, and I'm just kind of putting in some of these greens. I'm going to vary the green a little bit. Maybe even take some of this yellow green. And I'm going to put a couple little leaves just floating out there. The main thing I'm trying to do with this one is show you the difference of using the masking fluid versus not. So let's not judge the actual quality of these trees as much against each other, because I'm not necessarily doing as good of a job, but I'm doing the same thing where I'm defining some areas to have that kind of dark shadow area, and it's best to do this when everything is nice and dry. Other areas I'm going to keep where that has that nice kind of lightness to it. And I'm going to let that sit for a little bit and kind of try to take a little bit of a chill pill before I actually grab some darker blues. Let's actually do a little bit, let's use a little bit of that violet in here too. So this is phthalo and violet together. And now that I've chatted just a little bit, if I just touch that to the very edges of some of these parts that are still wet, we'll really be able to get some more deep shadows here. That one was a little bit too dry. You want them to be just barely wet so that it will soften the edges, but not so wet that it's going to bleed into everything. If you put it where it's a little bit too dry, go ahead and grab a little water and just kind of try to drag it out a little bit. All right, I'm going to let that chill for a minute. And I'm going to go back over here, because one of these fun touches is, and if you leave white space, this is what's going to give you the ability to do this, is in those white space areas, you can take this brown color and you can hint to some more of those branches, and it's going to really bring things together. It's kind of funny how much that can actually change things just by hinting in that white space to kind of be like, oh no, there is a branch here. I'm also going to give this a little more texture since this is nice and dry. Just kind of hint to some bark texture. We kind of said there was maybe a little imperfection over here. And there. Really kind of bumps it up, just some of those final little details. I'm going to try to do one more layer of some greens on this one. It's probably not really dry enough to do this, but I'm trying to make sure that I can actually let this dry enough to remove the masking fluid and show you how to add in the trunks afterwards in just a minute. So I'm just going to put in some more greens. I'm just kind of trying to build in a couple layers here. Sometimes with these classes, I think I want to make sure you guys get to see as many different things as possible, but then I think I put maybe a few too many things in them. But I'd rather you learned more than less, so you don't necessarily have to follow along with everything I'm doing, and if you decide to do things differently than me, that is 100% fine. This is all about you learning, and my real goal is just to provide you some knowledge as well as some time and space to actually set aside to do something like this, because I know sometimes that's the hardest part of this, is just making the time. remember when back in the day when I was a very important business person and I didn't have much time to create and I was really tired when I came home every day. And it was so easy just to plunk down in front of the TV and forget about stuff because you didn't have the energy. And then I had to actually, I made a deal with myself that there was one night a week I was not allowed to watch TV at all and I had to do something creative. And for the first few weeks I did that, it felt like such a chore. But then the more that I did it, the more that I really started to enjoy that time. Is there a non-absorbent cloth or mat I can lay over wet sections while you work on other parts? I don't know. Do you mean, yeah, so like one of the things that you can do is use your hand to kind of brace up the side. You can also use, a paper or a piece of paper here, but it will kind of absorb a little bit. So you do want to kind of try to, let's see if I can get a better view of this. I like having a nice table, and you can either use the edge of the table to kind of rest your hand on so that you're not going to drag it through, or if, you don't have the edge of the table is inaccessible, you can kind of just use your other hand to kind of prop it up. Okie dokie. So we need to let this dry before I can safely remove this masking fluid. Because we are going to be removing the masking fluid, we have to actually kind of rub it off. And the gentlest way to do this is with a nice soft eraser like this. I don't think a kneaded eraser would be hard enough, but this one is a pretty pliable one. This is I don't actually know anymore. I think it was called a tri-tip one. I really like this eraser. And this is how I actually remove the masking fluid from the different areas. So I'm going to set this aside to dry. Our sky should be dry enough to do our little cheater trees over here. Yeah, it is kind of a form of self-love. Yeah, I do. Well, I do tips through Venmo. There's absolutely, do not feel any pressure, but I mean, they're obviously nice and I do appreciate them, but I do these, because I enjoy doing them for you guys, so please don't feel any sort of pressure. But I do have a Rebel Unicorn Venmo, Rebel Unicorn Crafts Venmo. And one of the best ways that you can kind of pay me back for this class is actually sending me pictures afterwards. The best way to do that is through Instagram. Okay, so we're going to do little cheater trees like this in the foreground to kind of show a couple different layers of trees or forest. So if you really struggle with any of the other ones, this one is going to be your go-to for now, and they're super simple, but they can also be super cute in a painting. So you have Tombow watercolor pens. Can I use some of the same techniques? More than likely, I don't have any Tombow watercolor pens, so I'm not entirely sure. I do have some watercolor markers that are kind of fun. I like to use those for flowers, though. Alright, so similar to how we mixed up this blue, we want to actually have a decent amount because we're going to be covering about a whole third of the bottom. I'm going to just grab a little bit of this. I can use some of this blue in the green color I'm going to be mixing for this. Yes, so TikTok automatically records these, and bearing any sort of technical difficulties, I go in and grab these recordings afterwards, about a day or two after the live session, and then I upload it onto YouTube so that if you want to follow along either after the fact or catch the beginning part that you missed, you're welcome to do that. I'm going to grab a nice green color, and we can kind of do whatever green we want for this. You want this to be kind of a lighter green because I want to do 2 different layers of these trees. And I'm going to be using 2 different brushes here. So I'm going to start with this size 10 one, and then I'm going to be moving into the size 6 one and actually dipping into some more of these colors. My colors are a little bit dry at this point, so I'm going to re-wet them really quick. Alright, so we're making little cheater trees. The way to do this forest tree line cheater tree is you want to use the tip of your brush vertically, and you're just going to kind of touch so that you get a little variation and kind of hint to the peaks. Pull that down, vary the height of these, and this is really as kind of simple as it looks. Just tap it. Tap it vertically. And doesn't that I already think it looks really cute like this. Like it just I don't know, it really kind of balances the sky. And I'm just going to bring this all the way down. And I want to tap kind of quickly because I do want to do some additional color adding while things are still wet. But I'm kind of trying to pretend like these are trees that are on a mountainside. So while this is still wet, I'm going to wash my brush, make it damp, and I'm going to go in with some of this phthalo blue here. And I'm actually going to just kind of tap this in a couple different areas. I want to just create a little bit of variation of color, and this will soften as it dries a little bit. But kind of like that. So I haven't actually mentioned, I'm using a couple different types of paper today. Since I was just doing some like demonstration things, this one here is an Artist Loft watercolor 140 pound, the one that we did in here. This is actually pretty good. This is kind of comparable to the Canson, which is a great one. I still love Canson. I have been starting to like some other papers maybe a little bit more, but I don't think I'll stop using Canson, especially for doing some of these little studies and practice and for when I just want to paint. This one is actually a piece of Arches paper that I did a painting on the other side that I did not like, and so I've cut it up into smaller pieces and I'm using the back side of it. Alright, so I've kind of made a little variation of color there. I need to let this dry before I can add a second layer of mountains. And there is a question about the gouache pen. Let me grab it. So, this one says Flowers Gouache Pen, but I did go back and look in my Amazon history, and it was called Devisil. I put it in the description of the video, like the little bit of text. And I do have I have an Amazon affiliate link list on my website where I put affiliate links. Absolutely no pressure to buy any of it, but just in case you want to purchase any of the same stuff I'm using, you know, sometimes it's easier to figure out what you want to test based on what somebody else has used, but that will all be there. I think they actually say gel pens, but when they show up, they say gouache pens, so. Alright, I'm going to switch back over here and hope that this is dry enough. And just, this should be more dry. I'm gonna take this off. Alright, I really should wait or use a hairdryer, but I'm not going to. So in order to get this to come off, you just lightly rub with this eraser. And you won't really be able to see much of anything on the bottom because I didn't actually paint anything there. But you can see how it reserves that white space for us really nicely to actually put the tree trunks in. And since I'm doing this before everything is like 100% dry, you might see the eraser smudging some of the paints. The eraser isn't going to smudge the paint underneath if it is fully dry, like over here. See, it's not going to smudge that. But it might actually smudge into the white here a little bit just because I'm being impatient. So I'm going to remove these, and I'm going to show you just some of the kind of simple, adding some of these simple little tree trunks. So I used a masking fluid or a frisket. They're the same thing. They just, some brands call them different things. So for this, we just want to put kind of a little bit the darker side, just kind of add in some of these little details for these trunks. I want this to be a little bit warmer. I'm going to grab a little more of that burnt sienna color. A little water. And look how simple that is to actually just add in a little bit of a tree trunk now that we've masked that area off and then took it off. And just add in some of these little tree trunk details. And you can always just put in a few little lines too. My only recommendation with, well, I've got a few recommendations with masking fluid. If you're in a house that doesn't have children or you don't have to worry about things getting opened on accident, the Winsor & Newton one comes with like a child safety cap on it, and it makes it almost impossible to actually open it. So I like this one because I can just remove the cap. But because this stuff is basically like liquid rubber, that child seal, somehow it really gets caught in it, and it will take me multiple minutes to open it, and I'm pretty good at opening things. So yeah, but that's how you use the masking fluid, and you can get it allows you to do a couple things. It really defines certain areas, and sometimes you don't have to plan as much while you're actually doing the painting part of it, because you've already kind of pre-planned where things are going to be, and they'll just naturally kind of become defined. And there. We've got some tree trunks. All right. Yeah, so I've used the Winsor & Newton one. That's what I've used before, and then this is the new one I bought. This is the Grumbacher Misket, and I think it's basically the same price as the Winsor & Newton one, but I have liked this one a little better. I don't know how much of that is just the fact that I don't have to spend 10 minutes getting it open. Yeah, one of the funny side effects of, I also do quite a bit of metal work, and metal smithing stuff, and one of the side effects is I've got a really strong grip strength, so I don't have to ask help to open jars or anything, so that's kind of a nice side effect. Although I've got nothing on that one metalsmith dude, or the forger. Have you seen where he can just crush cans or apples with his hands? That is incredible. Got a little bit of that masking fluid in there. Alright, so I'm going to do another layer of these trees, but I want the color to be a little darker. Again, I want to make sure I've got a decent amount. And I'm going to put some water in here. And I'm just going to go for some darker colors. I'm going to go into that Viridian green. Where's my little tester paper so I know what color I'm mixing up? Remember, if you can, to go ahead and always have some extra paper that you don't mind just making some marks on, because the colors are going to look a lot different from kind of where they're sitting in the pan. I'm going to put some of this olive green in here too. Maybe a little more of that Viridian. I still want it to be darker. And if you wanted to take advantage of the opposites to mute this color, you can go ahead and put some red in here and it will make it both darker and a little bit more muted. Even just a little bit is going to change that color quite a bit. I think I want it to be a little bit more blue, so I'm going to actually add some phthalo blue in. There we go. That's the color I want. You can use whatever color you want. And I'm just going to make another layer of trees, and they're going to fall kind of in front of, they're not going to go over the previous layer. This is similar to if you've taken any of my classes where I show how to do the mountains. You know, you want this layer to be dry, and then you just come in, and it's a similar thing with the mountains as it is with the trees, except for we're just making kind of these little tappy motions to create the illusion of some trees, like the treetops. And again, I'm going to switch over to my brush, my smaller brush. And I'm going to grab some phthalo blue and mix this in. And I'm just going to kind of highlight a few of these areas along the top. Give them a little bit more depth and shadow. You can do the same thing if you wanted to do like a fall scene, but instead of using greens and blues, you might use like a really bright like lime green and then pop in some yellows and oranges, and that will kind of give you some fall vibes. But these are the little cheater trees, quote unquote cheater trees. I really like them. So I broadcast for these, I say it's an hour and a half for these classes just to make sure in case you can budget the time. And it's been about an hour and 20 minutes. So yeah, I kind of set an initial time frame for my lives on Saturdays. When I go live during the week, if I'm live during the week, it's just because I feel like chatting and working on something, and so I don't usually put a time frame. It's just kind of for as long as I'm enjoying it. Okay. So that does conclude our class today. If you have any questions, please let me know at this time. I've got a few minutes to stick around and answer a couple questions. And also, please send me pictures. Lacey Walker Art or Rebel Unicorn Crafts. I don't actually post a ton on Instagram, but it is easier for me to receive messages through that. I always love to see videos if you make them, but I do know if you're trying to take the class and watch it, it's pretty hard to film it. So, other than that, if you don't have any questions, I hope everybody has a really fabulous day. And, what's next week? I don't know. I have not planned it. Anybody have any requests for next week's class? I have been thinking about redoing a color mixing class. I've also been thinking about doing another abstract class because that's a really fun one to get to know paints and stuff. We haven't done flowers in a while. That's another one I was thinking about. And then as far as the animal, I have been trying to figure out how to do classes like that. And right now, I think I would need to provide some sort of a reference photo for you guys to do, and I just need to get my ducks in a row. I will be doing that at some point. I don't know if I've got time in the next few weeks to kind of schedule that type of a live. I think I'll need to schedule that one out a couple weeks too, so that people have time to prepare. Oh, you were very nice. Well, I really appreciate everyone on here and, all the comments you leave and things like that. It does really brighten my day. So maybe next week we'll do some Maybe we'll do some flowers. There were quite a few requests for that. I will be working on some animal stuff at some point. I don't know if it will be quite yet, though. Thank you so much. I'm going to sign off now, and please send me pictures, and I hope everybody has a really good day. Oh, also, it will be re-uploaded onto YouTube, so if you do want to check out the beginning part that you missed, it will be there as well. So, I'll see you soon.